And bad morning, everybody. Today is October 24th, 2018. Welcome to 68 of Bad Morning News, where all the negative news for the day is what's on schedule, not just feel good celebrity crap. So, thanks for joining us for that. Couple housekeeping notes. We're looking for more hosts for Bad Morning News if you are interested in either this morning slot or potentially an afternoon version of Bad Morning News at some point. Let us know in the comments or in the Discord. And thank you to Brave Browser for sponsoring the show. If you're tired of the typical corporations out there selling your information to the highest bidders, give Brave Browser a try. If you download their browser via the link in the description box, it will benefit the show. So thanks to anyone considering doing that. And with that, I'm Cryptic Cynic with you here today. Thanks for joining me this bad morning. And with that, we'll get right into the first article. This one's from antiwar.com. Report Khashoggi's remains disposed of in Saudi Consul General's garden. This is written by Jason Ditz. 3 weeks after he entered the Saudi consulate in Istanbul and never emerged, Turkish officials are reporting that journalist Jamal Khashoggi's body and personal effects have finally been found. The circumstances once again support the idea that a Saudi kill team that arrived at the consulate at the same time indeed killed and attempted to dispose of him. Though Turkish investigators are so far not confirming or denying it, top Turkish official Dogu Perinsek is reporting that Khashoggi's body was found cut up and disfigured and dumped in the well in the garden belonging to the Saudi Consul General. This all supports the audio recording of Khashoggi's murder, in which the then Consul General objected to the kill team killing and cutting up Khashoggi in the consulate, saying he'd get in trouble. He's been fired and recalled to Saudi Arabia for an investigation. Turkish state media are getting confirmation from state media, however, that Khashoggi's possessions have been found in a car belonging to the Saudi consulate, which was discovered in an underground garage. Inside the car, there were 3 suitcases found. These contained Khashoggi's laptop computer and clothing. This supports the story that Khashoggi, after being killed, was stripped of his clothing, which was put on a body double, who left the consulate to try and cover up the fact that Khashoggi himself never did. So this is just an update to obviously the one of the biggest stories in the news right now with this former Washington Post journalist who disappeared in the Turkish consulate, and Saudi Arabia tried to deny it and then came out with a bizarre statement saying that it was an accident when Khashoggi and whoever these dudes were got in a fight in the consulate, and he somehow ended up getting chopped up with a chainsaw. So this is just an update to that, I guess. So his body has been found in a garden belonging to the Saudi Consul General. And, this has been a spectacular falling apart of Saudi Arabia's story over the past few weeks. And, obviously it's very bizarre and just another indication of what this, what the leadership of Saudi Arabia stands for. And, what a lot of people are mentioning is how sad it is that it took this particular case to make Washington and a lot of the general public really come to realize that Saudi Arabia does horrible shit all the time. And obviously, they've been waging a years-long war on Yemen, where there's children, millions of people, including children, obviously starving to death, and that hasn't been covered in the mainstream over the past several years. But now, all of a sudden, the mainstream media and the politicians in the U.S. are finally finding it within themselves to decry the U.S.'s comfortable relationship with the Saudi regime. So we'll have to watch and see if anything actually changes with that, if the actual relationship between the U.S. and Saudi regime changes, if the U.S. stops selling, millions, if not billions of dollars in military weaponry to Saudi Arabia. We'll see if any of that actually happens, or if this ends up just being another, a huge story that just goes away after a few days. And that would really be bad. I would hope, at least, that if nothing else, even if it couldn't have been done before this, which it should have been, if nothing else, at least this could be a point for people to really realize what is going on, and one asking why this relationship exists, and all the aid and military weaponry sold to them by the United States continues. So hopefully, um, the politicians will be under enough pressure to stop it, perhaps. But we'll have to wait and see on that. And with that, the next article I want to get to is this comes from BloombergQuint.com. This article is titled, "Now Apps Can Track You Even After You Uninstall Them." This article is written by Garrett DeVink. Bloomberg Businessweek. If it seems as though the app you deleted last week is suddenly popping up everywhere, it may not be mere coincidence. Companies that cater to app makers have found ways to game both iOS and Android, enabling them to figure out which users have uninstalled a given piece of software lately, and making it easy to pelt the departed with ads aimed at winning them back. Adjust, AppsFlyer, MoEngage, Localytics, and CleverTap are among the companies that offer uninstall trackers, usually as part of a broader set of developer tools. Their customers include T-Mobile US, Spotify Technology, and Yelp, and Bloomberg Businessweek parent Bloomberg LP, which uses Localytics. Critics say they're a fresh reason to reassess online privacy rights and limit what companies can do with user data. Most tech companies are not giving people nuanced privacy choices, if they give them choices at all, says Jeremy Galula, Tech Policy Director at the Electronic Frontier Foundation, a privacy advocate. Some providers say these tracking tools are meant to measure user reaction to app updates and other changes. Jude McColgan, Chief Executive Officer of Boston's Localytics, says he hasn't seen clients use the technology to target former users with ads. Aaron Mage, Vice President for Marketing and Sales at MoEngage Inc. in San Francisco, says it's up to the app makers not to do so. The dialogue is between our customers and their end users. He says if they violate users' trust, it's not going to go well for them. Adjust, AppsFlyer, and CleverTap didn't respond to requests for comment, nor did T-Mobile, Spotify, or Yelp. Uninstall tracking exploits a core element of Apple Inc.'s and Google's mobile operating systems, push notifications. Developers have always been able to use so-called silent push notifications to ping installed apps at regular intervals without alerting the user to refresh an inbox or social media feed while the app is running in the background, for example. But if the app doesn't ping the developer back, the app is logged as uninstalled, and the uninstall tracking tools add those changes to the file associated with the given mobile device's unique advertising ID, details that make it easy to identify just who's holding the phone and advertise the app to them wherever they go. The tools violate Apple and Google policies against using silent push notifications to build advertising audiences, says Alex Austin, CEO of Branch Metrics Inc., which makes software for developers, but chose not to create an uninstall tracker. It's just generally sketchy to track people around the internet after they've opted out of using your product, he says, adding that he expects Apple and Google to crack down on the practice soon. Apple and Google didn't respond to requests for comment. At its best, uninstall tracking can be used to fix bugs or otherwise refine apps without having to bother users with surveys or more intrusive tools. But the ability to abuse the system beyond its original intent exemplifies the bind that accompanies the modern internet, says Galula. To participate, users must typically agree to share their data freely, probably forever, not knowing exactly how it may be used down the road. As an app developer, I would expect to be able to know how many people have uninstalled an app. He says, I would not say that as an app developer, you have a right to know exactly who installed and uninstalled your app. And that's the end of that article. So this is just pretty interesting look at something that people probably have been suspecting for a while, but really kind of just puts it out there that apparently there are companies that make systems that they sell to app developers that can then track people even after they tried to uninstall their app. And this really, is relevant to me. I've just been dealing with trying to uninstall a bunch of apps that I don't use, and it seems like certain apps don't even allow you to uninstall them in the in the same way as other apps. They won't allow you to fully uninstall them, and you can only uninstall the updates. YouTube is one of those, so it's always bizarre when it seems like you should be able to control what apps are on your phone and you can't even uninstall them. And that goes also for many other apps that are just waste of space on your phone. And that usually comes from a lot of these carriers that when it's an Android phone especially, they add a lot of just bloatware that people really don't know what even the purpose is of having them. But again, you can't really uninstall them. So just another downside of our tech world now. Like the article says, people just pretty much sign away all of their privacy with their data in agreeing to use these apps. And it increasingly seems like the only way to avoid it is to really withdraw from a lot of this technology now, because it really makes us into the product, and when we're the product, they're not going to make it easy for us to avoid sharing data, and it's I just find it really tiresome with every app and every website even has notices saying we use cookies and we'll track you and this and that, and it's you kind of just feel like, okay, I have to click okay because I want to read this site or I want to use this app, and you don't even people don't know what even is happening. Ultimately, I don't know what data is out there with a lot of these apps. So it's definitely one of my goals to really draw back one day, draw back and try to really just stop using them, because I know they try to draw people in with the convenience, obviously, of using these apps or whatever it is, entertainment. But at the end of the day, I mean, if you really don't want to be tracked, it seems like the only option is really to stop using it at this point. So let me know what you guys think about all of that in the comments, and I'll try to check these out here. Daniel says, "Bad morning, sorry I'm late." No problem, good to see you as always, Daniel. Daniel says, "Super irritating to have to use irritating to have all this junk I never use and didn't install myself. Bleh. Yeah, exactly. I have probably at least 10 or 12 apps just from my carrier that I have no idea what they're even for. Just all of these assorted Sprint apps that I don't know what they're for and I can't even take off of my phone. So things like that, just always very sketchy, as the article says. Max says, "Why don't you want to be tracked? Are you up to something?" Yeah, exactly. And good to see you, Max. Yes, I am up to something. I'm up to trying to live a life that's not within the Panopticon. I assume many of you guys are too. So, apparently that's not an option today. And I think about that a lot especially when these stories come up with, especially involving children, and I realize how normalized it is now for young children to have these phones and tablets just in their hands all day long, and it blows me away. And I'm not even like 30 yet, and to me, I feel old as hell because there's these kids running around with like $1,000 pieces of technology that I never could have imagined when I was that age. That children would have so much technology in their hands, and and that's not the point of just not just the technology itself, but that they're being acclimated to this culture now, of them being a product, for advertisement um, purposes, and that everything they do on these apps or on the internet is being collected and stored and being sold so that they can be shown ads relevant to their life, and all of this data about their life is being stored and for indefinite periods of time. I mean, imagine, in the future where people have had their entire lives from infancy logged, everything learned about their personality and their habits and everything else being logged on a server somewhere. I mean, I feel like I at least partially dodged a bullet in that regard, but I really feel bad for. And they'll have the idea that it's normal, so like they'll be even less questioning, and that's what I fear, is having people who don't even question it at all, which I know many adults, now don't, but obviously as it goes forward, if we keep going forward in this vein, I mean, children will just think that's totally normal, and where do you go from there? At that point, it really would be like people being pets, basically, to the government, or to not just the government, but all these corporations that will just use us as tools of consumerism, essentially. All right, this next article this morning is from Mint Press News. This said Abdul Karim, civilian death mounting as Saudi coalition targets cars traveling Yemen's roads. At least 7 Yemeni civilians were killed on Sunday when Saudi-led coalition aircraft targeted residential areas in Yemen's northwestern province of Hajjah Sada and the western coastal province of Hodeidah. In Hajjah, Saudi airstrikes targeted a car as it was traveling on a road in the Bani Hassan area of the Abs district on Sunday afternoon, leaving 4 people dead and 1 injured, including 1 woman. In Sada, an Ansar Allah Houthi stronghold, a woman was killed and another injured when Saudi border guards fired artillery shells against a residential region in the border area of Shada. The thruway in Munabeh, a border area located east of Shada, was cut off after the Saudi attack on Monday. In Hodeidah, 2 civilians were killed and 6 others, including children, wounded when United Arab Emirates aircraft targeted the Zayed Road in the Al Hali district of Hodeidah province. the Legal Center for Rights and Development in Yemen, a non-governmental organization monitoring human rights violations immediately after their occurrence, told Mint Press that the ongoing Saudi-led military campaign against Yemen has resulted in the death of 15,185 civilians, including 3,527 children and 2,277 women, a total of 23,822 civilians, among them 3,526 children and 2,587 women have sustained injuries and are currently suffering from a shortage of medical supplies and treatment resulting from the crippling Saudi land, air, and sea blockade. The center further noted that the Saudi-led coalition has caused the deaths of nearly 2,200 Yemenis from cholera. The center noted that coalition airstrikes have resulted in the destruction of 15 airports, 14 ports, and damaged 2,559 roads and bridges, in addition to 781 water storage facilities, 191 power stations, and 426 telecommunications towers. The center went on to say that Saudi and UAE bombardment has destroyed at least 421,911 homes, 930 mosques, 888 schools, 327 hospitals and health facilities, and 38 media organizations, while also halting the operation of 4,500 schools and leaving more than 4 million people internally displaced. And that's the end of that article. And I thought, it's important to keep a spotlight on Yemen. It's been ignored for so long, and only recently has started to get mentioned in the mainstream media, mostly just because of the Khashoggi apparent killing by the Saudi regime people in the in a Turkish embassy. But unfortunately, this has been going on for years, with the U.S. obviously being the main seller of armament to Saudi Arabia, as well as providing refueling and other services to the Saudi military, as they are conducting a lot of these strikes that are apparently killing many civilians, as most wars do. All the credible studies say that the vast majority of people being killed in all of these conflicts now, especially, are all just innocent people who live in these areas, because so many areas where this is going on are highly and densely populated. So when you drop bombs on them, whether it's Saudi Arabia bombing Yemen, or the U.S. bombing Iraq or Afghanistan or Syria or Somalia, or apparently even Niger at this point. I don't know how many countries the U.S. is bombing. It's hard to keep track, but they always use the rationale of, well, we're targeting militants or these people that we claim have done something bad. But the reality is that these people are within, communities of many other people who have nothing to do with anything, and they end up being the so-called collateral damage. And that collateral damage just ends up being statistics that people have a hard time wrapping their mind around, which is why, the American people, just did not know or care, or understand, what's going on in these places, and especially Yemen. But I think it is important to really keep that in mind. I mean, among all the news out there, stuff going on, I mean, there's always lots going on domestically in the U.S. and within the European Union now. But I think it's important to really keep the spotlight on the worst things that governments do, which is just the destruction of lives, especially innocent lives. So I can't really stress that enough, and it is hard, even for me to really read that every day because if I go to like antiwar.com or mintpressnews.com, you do see that every day, but it does get to a point where it's just hard to think about, and you feel powerless because it's like I can't do anything really to stop it. Um, and I think, if nothing else, it is a good example to some of these people, especially on the left, who complain a lot about the way Trump acts and all of these superficial things, to say, well, would your candidate, would Hillary have stopped all of this carnage around the world? I don't think so. Did Obama stop it? No, he did not. So, if you really want to get down to it, this is what the government is doing, regardless of, whether it's Team Red or Team Blue in the White House at any given time. This is what it comes down to, and this is why I tell people that I'm not going to vote just because you have this one issue or another that you feel strongly about, but ultimately, no, there's no candidate available who will not perpetuate death, and I'm not going to sign on and give my consent and permission to anyone who will be at the helm of the government committing these atrocities, which all of them will. So that's just my thing, I guess. I saw people this morning, trotting out the same old uh, lesser of two evils stuff. We got to vote Democrat because Trump is really mean to the LGBT community, and and so we have to vote Democrat and do something. I don't know what it is they think is accomplished, but in my view, all of that is not a good enough reason to sign on to consent, even in that way of just casting a ballot to the government. Because as we know, even those of us who know what's going on and don't want to support it, we are forced to because, partially because of so many people around us believing in the idea that we need government because they provide services and help people, and they never look at the fact that the vast majority of that money is actually going to people like Saudi Arabia and going towards the military industrial complex that will just have us be in perpetual war forever because they benefit from it, and it's easy to propagandize people into supporting it, as many refer to as manufactured consent. So, with that, I'll try to check the comments here. Max says, what was that word? Cryptic. It was panopticon. I think that might originate from 1984 or one of those dystopian novels, but Panopticon, it's like the idea of a watchtower, like in a prison maybe, where there's a closed off center with one-way mirrors so the people inside can see out, and but those outside can't see in. They can't see who's in that tower, and that's us now. And who's inside the tower is obviously these corporations and the government, and it basically functions as a way of making people self-censor because we don't know who's watching us and when. Even if no one's watching, we have the sense that someone could be watching because there's this tower with that we can't see into, and that's just kind of a way of describing the government and how it's structured and the elites. I mean, the way they keep people in line with the fear that at any time maybe the cops will come, break your door down, and accuse you of doing whatever, or that they're collecting your info or whatever it is. But unfortunately, that's how I feel. I feel like increasingly we're in that culture where we're afraid now because we can't trust that anything we say or do or put out online, uh, it won't be collected by some entity and used against us. And yeah, and I'll admit that I feel that at times as well. And I know, um, obviously they can't, they won't go after every person. Um, they'll make examples of those who have more following and that type of thing, like with Ross Ulbricht. But uh, everyone, even if they are not necessarily targeted, they have the fear in their mind that someone could be watching their actions. And Max says, on the lesser of two evils mentality, well said, pick your brand of socialism. I agree. And with that, we'll move to the next article, pretty related to this topic. And this is from good old Free Thought Project. Just the beginning, top neocon insider claims responsibility for Facebook purge, says more to come. A top neocon insider appeared to claim credit for the recent Facebook purge of alternative media and warned that there is more to come. An employee of a... Sorry, I gotta stop this ad. Oh, great. That didn't work. Anyway. An employee of a leading Washington, D.C. think tank has reportedly taken credit for the recent purge of alternative media by Facebook and Twitter, claiming it to be necessary to fight against, quote, fake news from Russia and China. In the latest act of apparent censorship of political speech online, US-based tech giants this month shut down hundreds of user accounts. Some belonged to well-established alternative media outlets with hundreds of thousands of followers, like the Free Thought Project or Anti-Media, a senior fellow at the German Marshall Fund, a leading think tank advocating U.S. global supremacy, seems to have at least partially taken credit for this. Russia, China, and other foreign states take advantage of our open political system, Jamie Fly said. They can invent stories that get repeated and spread through different sites, so we are just starting to push back. Just this last week, Facebook began starting to take down sites, so this is just the beginning. The remarks were cited by Jeb Sprague, a visiting faculty member in sociology at the University of California, Santa Barbara, in a story he co-authored for the Gray Zone Project, an outlet known for criticism of online censorship. Sprague said Fly made the comments to him during a lunch break at a conference on Asian security organized by Stiftung Wissenschaft and Politik in Berlin, Germany. According to the account, Fly complained that any person with an email can set up an account on social media and potentially reach a wide audience. He predicted a long global struggle to fix the situation. Fly started his career in U.S. political circles as an advisor to the George Bush II administration. He was also a foreign policy and national security consultant for Senator Marco Rubio when he was trying to secure the 2016 presidential nomination for the Republican Party. For 4 years, he headed the Foreign Policy Initiative, a pro-Israeli think tank founded by neoconservative figures Bill Kristol, Dan Senor, and Robert Kagan. In the last few years, Fly showed up as an expert on social media and Russian disinformation on various outlets to speak about alleged Russian interference in the 2016 election. Among other things, he teamed up with Laura Rosenberger, the head of the Alliance for Securing Democracy, the organization behind the Hamilton 68 dashboard, a tool that purports to show Russian online interference on Twitter based on monitoring a number of the undisclosed accounts and applying a secret methodology to analyze the data. According to Sprague, Fly also stated that he was working with the Atlantic Council in the campaign to purge alternative media from social media platforms like Facebook. The social media network has partnered with the Atlantic Council's digital forensic research lab to root out fake news on its platform. The think tank is not unlike the German Marshall Fund in terms of the policies it furthers, with some commenters simply calling it NATO's PR branch. And that's the end of that article. So apparently, one of these guys who's pretty heavily in the neocon scene, as we know, some of the names dropped there. Bill Kristol, Robert Kagan, and Atlantic Council are pretty big figures in the neocon movement, if you will. But he's seemingly taking some credit for the purge that happened last week, taking down sites that I really find very informative, like the Free Thought Project, like Activist Post that we refer to a lot on the show. And of course, they're very threatened by the perspective being put out there by the Free Thought Project. And I think it's really telling how he comes out and says that it's awful to him that anyone, just anyone, can sign up with an email and create an account on social media and gain a following. How dare they? You know, how dare people dare to have opinions online and share them with people without being an officially sanctioned mainstream media hack? Apparently that's very offensive to this guy. But as we know, there is this war going on now that I wouldn't even have seen coming really even 5 years ago, and I really took it for granted that the internet would always be there for people who want to put an independent voice out there. But apparently, it's under attack now, and it'll be really devastating if it becomes totally controlled and purged of any dissenting voices. But yeah, I would definitely hate to see the internet become totally dominated by these few, uh, mega corporations, and have them deciding what's legitimate news and what's not. And all we can do is try to seek alternatives and support these alternative outlets when we can. So I always appreciate Free Thought Project being there. I'll definitely continue to raise awareness of them and hope that other people will tune in or read their articles on their site and all of that. And hopefully they will have more followings on some of the new social media out there that's trying to decentralize and trying to have a more open platform than Facebook and whatnot. I think MeWe is one of them, as well as Minds.com. So we'll just have to keep an eye on that and see where they go, and I'll definitely be following them. All right, this next article comes from. Let's see. This article is from theroot.com. The wildly unregulated practice of undercover cops friending people on Facebook. This is written by Kashmir Hill. Terrence Everett has been on the wrong side of the law for most of his adult life. When he was 18, he had to register as a sex offender for having sex with a 15-year-old because she was under the age of consent. In his 20s, he says, hanging out with the wrong people, doing the wrong things, resulting in charges for drug possession and assault, as well as a conviction for distribution of cocaine. He spent a few years in prison, got out at age 33, and decided he needed to turn his life around. He got jobs that didn't involve illegal activity, working as a bouncer at a club and as a supervisor at the port of Wilmington in Delaware, but it all fell apart in 2016. Police threw a smoke bomb into his living room, detained his pregnant girlfriend, and sent him to prison for 15 years, all because of a photo posted to Facebook. Everett, 41, loves social media. He is an avid user of both Facebook and Instagram, frequently posting memes, selfies, and assortment of jokes about sex and his prowess at it. Judging from his number of connections, 1,674 Instagram followers, and 1,763 Facebook friends, he's not terribly discriminating when it comes to making friends online, and in 2013, he became one of the many Americans who has unknowingly accepted a friend request from an undercover police officer. Police have come to recognize the fertile hunting ground of social media and are covertly surveilling people and groups there with little oversight. We don't know how many people have been targeted for undercover surveillance on social media because police departments don't keep track of it in a public manner and prefer, in general, not to discuss it. They're willing to talk about posing as kids online to snare sexual predators, a relatively uncontroversial undercover practice, but they're far more secretive about targeting suspected gang members, protesters, and other people of interest. We reached out to dozens of police departments around the country to ask what their policies are when it comes to undercover Facebook police work, and discovered that very few have any kind of formal rules governing it. Every high-tech crime unit has one. A New Jersey officer who monitors suspected gang members and drug dealers with an undercover account told NBC News, "It's not uncommon, but we don't like to talk about it too much." The police officer who friended Everett, Bradley Landis of the New Castle County Police Department, checked Everett's account with surprising regularity. For more than 2 years, he checked Everett's page 1 to 3 times a week, according to his own testimony. On one Wednesday morning in November of 2015, his years-long online sting paid off. At 10 a.m., Officer Landis spotted a photo that had been posted to Everett's Facebook wall 5 hours earlier of a nightstand with two cell phones, keys to a Mercedes, cash, and a handgun. It was captioned, "Just getting in for the night, how I sleep every night. Hashtag fuckboy free zone." Everett tells me he didn't post the photo. His then girlfriend used his phone to post it, he says, not realizing what the consequences would be. In Delaware, as in many states, convicted felons are not allowed to own guns, so the photo set off an alarm bell for Officer Landis. Everett deleted the photo by the afternoon, but it was too late. Landis had taken a screenshot. The next day at 7:30 a.m., according to court documents, officers knocked down the front door of Everett's house and threw a smoke bomb inside. Everett wasn't there, but his pregnant girlfriend, Bianca Sencion, was in the upstairs bedroom. The officers brought her down to the kitchen, put her in zip tie cuffs, and searched the house. The officers found the gun from the photo in the drawer of the nightstand it had been photographed on, but Sencion said it belonged to her, a claim later backed up by purchase records at Cabela's. A friend of Sencion also told me it was Bianca's gun, that she had bought it because she was a stripper and felt she needed protection in case she was approached by an overeager fan or someone who knew she carried a lot of cash after performing. Delaware authorities accused Sencion of making a straw purchase, buying a gun for someone who couldn't do it himself, and charged Everett with possession of a gun by a person prohibited. Everett was convicted and given a 15-year prison sentence, which has to go in the record books as one of the worst outcomes ever for an ill-advised Facebook photo. Regardless of who took the photo or who owned the gun, the bigger question is why Officer Landis had been stalking Everett on Facebook for more than 2 years in the first place, and was thus able to spot a photo that was live on Everett's Facebook page for less than 12 hours. At the trial, Officer Landis told Everett's lawyer that he'd had the undercover account for 3 years and used photos from Google to populate it, but refused to reveal more, saying that it would compromise other investigations. Landis was never asked why he initially friended Everett. When I posed the question to Corporal Heather Carter, then spokesperson for the Newcastle County Police Department, she told me Landis had friended Everett because he was known to police from his prior involvement with the police. That suggests that he wasn't a target of specific investigation, but rather subject to a dragnet surveillance operation. Everett thinks he was monitored by the police department in retaliation for a 2013 YouTube video. Cop pulls black guy over for nothing and gets dissed. The video starring Everett being pulled over for playing his music too loud has over 1.2 million views. The police department did not respond to a request for comment about this. In an August article in the Howard Law Journal, Rachel Levinson Waldman of the Brennan Center for Media Justice took a deep look at the legal and policy dilemmas posed by law enforcement's aggressive use of social media for policing. There's always been the ability to do undercover work, said Levinson Waldman, by phone, but with modern technology, it's way easier to do. You just sit at your desk and send friend requests to 15 people and then check to see what they're up to, as opposed to assuming a real-world identity and attending meetings. Interacting with people undercover in real life entails a lot of risk, but online that's not the case. In recent years, the Supreme Court has ruled that new technologies that make it easy for police officers to gather data about our physical movements via GPS trackers and records of where we've been created by our smartphones violate our constitutional rights unless police officers get warrants to use them. But unless law enforcement does something particularly egregious, as when the DEA stole a woman's photos in order to impersonate her on Facebook, courts haven't shown much concern about dragnet surveillance online. Everett's public defenders appealed his case to the Delaware Supreme Court, saying Everett's Fourth Amendment right against unreasonable searches had been violated by being covertly surveilled on social media for years, but the court wasn't sympathetic. The court wrote that the Fourth Amendment does not guard against the risk that the person from whom one accepts a friend request and to whom one voluntarily disclosed such information might turn out to be an undercover officer, citing a 2014 case in New Jersey where a judge similarly decided that a burglar's Fourth Amendment rights weren't violated when an undercover cop started following him on Instagram without getting a warrant first. But that was a case where the cops went undercover to investigate a specific crime, a string of burglaries in which the surveilled Instagrammer was a suspect. The judges who decided against Everett's appeal didn't seem concerned by the extended period of surveillance nor the lack of an actual motive for the investigation. According to the Delaware Supreme Court, cops have the right to undercover friend people on social media whenever they want for however long they want. That means the only relevant law may be Facebook's own. Our community standards require people to use their authentic identity, and our standards apply to everyone on Facebook. A Facebook spokesperson told me earlier this year when asked about the company's stance on the use of fictitious or undercover accounts by law enforcement. Facebook has written angry letters to the DEA and Memphis Police Department after undercover work that drew media attention, but its guide for law enforcement didn't explicitly instruct police not to misrepresent themselves on Facebook until last month. Absent federal or state laws that regulate undercover friending, it's up to law enforcement to self-police its behavior on social media. In Newcastle County, where Officer Landis works, individual officers get to make the call on covert digital surveillance. We have a policy for officers for their personal social media accounts. They can't wear their uniforms or show pictures that are defaming the agency, said police department spokesperson Corporal Carter by phone. There is no policy for using social media accounts for investigation. It's like handling a confidential informant. Each officer and detective handles it differently. You might do it one way and another might do it another way. Catherine Crump, a law professor at UC Berkeley, found that horrifying. Our social media profiles contain sensitive private information. The circumstances under which police access those profiles raise important public policy questions that should be decided in a transparent public process, not by police departments acting on their own, and certainly not by individual officers making it up as they go along, she said by email. Police departments should have written policies explaining when they will go undercover to access our social media profiles, and those policies should be vetted by elected representatives with input from members of the public. But leaving it up to individual officers is not unusual. We sent Freedom of Information Act requests to over 50 police departments across the country, asking them for policies and training materials related to covert investigative work on social media. We chose the departments based on geographical diversity and news coverage of departments that have used undercover social media accounts. The vast majority of departments have social media policies, but most don't address covert investigations. Their rules, in keeping with advice from the Internal Association of Chiefs of Police, primarily address official accounts and personal use of social media by employees. For example, don't say racist things on Facebook. And this article goes on longer, and it's a pretty interesting read, but I think the overall impression is there. And to me, where in the article where they talk to these people who say, we need policies and this and that, um, and one said it's sensitive and private, and unfortunately, it's not that simple to say, well, it's sensitive and private, therefore there needs to be laws protecting it. As we know, that's what Facebook does. It's a place where people do divulge all their private information, and but frankly, I mean, it is public, so I don't. I mean, unfortunately, I obviously feel bad for this guy, but I don't think it's. I mean, you have to have some expectation that something on the internet can be viewed by anyone. I think that's like rule number one of the internet at this point. I don't, it seems a little hard for me to believe that someone can really say at this point, like, gee, I didn't, I posted something and a cop saw it. I mean, again, like, not saying that it's good that that's happening or that I support, obviously cops doing that, but we should all be assuming that potentially anything we post online can be viewed by law enforcement, especially something that is ostensibly public, like a Facebook page. Um, Unfortunately, that's the reality, and that's why, again, I think there is a cultural aspect that needs to be addressed beyond, even with knowing the cops do corrupt shit all the time. But I think it's worth people really stepping back and taking a look at what they're participating in and what they're willing to do, and understanding the consequences. Um, you know, at this point, I don't think any amount of trying to hold accountable police departments or asking them to have policies in place. I mean, at the end of the day, that's not going to stop where our culture is in terms of people willfully putting all this sensitive information out there for anyone to view. And I think this is just a convergence of police state and the corporate tech uh, whatever state, converging, and I think it's going to take people really realizing what that is. In order for them to be protected, they're going to have to protect themselves, essentially. I don't think you can rely on any amount of laws or regulation to protect you. We need to really look at what we're putting out there and act accordingly, and with which companies are potentially more trustworthy than others, and which ones will joyfully give over your information to police, whether it's even if it's not stuff that's blatantly public, like on a Facebook wall, even if it's more internal information, as we've seen in many stories we've talked about here, things that aren't necessarily that public still being turned over by Facebook, Google, etc. to law enforcement. So unfortunately, and I mean, of course, it's I mean, separate from the tech issue, that someone gets 15 years in prison for having a gun because he's an ex-con or whatever. Obviously, that's very sick. I don't know how else to say it. Putting someone in a cage for 15 years for trying to exercise their right to self-defense. And articles, according to the article, he claims it's not even his, and there's potentially evidence that his girlfriend is the one who bought the gun. But, again, they just went and said, well, you're giving access to someone who's not allowed to have a gun, access, and threw the book at him and punished her as well, I think it said. So, I mean, that, if nothing else, just another look at how our prisons are being filled up with people who are largely nonviolent. Even the things he was convicted of were mostly nonviolent things. He didn't murder anybody, but now he's an ex-con and, he's not allowed to have a gun, which I find a violation of an individual's right to self-defense, regardless of the laws trying to dictate who's allowed to and not. But in any event, again, this is just a convergence of being screwed by the police monopoly and being screwed by our tech culture of oversharing and not recognizing the true nature of what's going on with all this technology now. And I'll hit up some comments here. Danielle says this case seems really thin, so I don't know why he was ever convicted. That's a good question as well, because as the article says, there's reason to believe that his girlfriend purchased the gun, but apparently that's not good enough, I guess, according to the law, and they can still claim that he's given access to a gun, which is apparently still enough to put him in jail for 15 years after, he tried to turn his life around, and that's what happens. He gets put back in jail, and that's why the U.S. is the leader in, incarceration rate. And, largely nonviolent people. And, it's an endless cycle. You throw people in jail, they're just more likely to end up there. It's, all just an endless circle of misery and whatnot. But on that bright note, that's probably a good place to end for today. But I am glad to see all of you here as usual. Thanks for commenting and joining in the bad news discussion this morning. And just a couple notes, we're looking for more hosts for Bad Morning News. If you are interested in that, get a hold of us in Discord or in the comments. All the links from today's articles will be in the description within a few minutes here. And with that, have a bad morning, everybody. I'll see you tomorrow. This has been episode 68 of Bad Morning News for October 24th, 2018. And remember, screw the state, fuck the system. I'll see you guys tomorrow.